Hey everyone, in today's tutorial we'll be exploring some basic programming constructs that will open the doorway to C# for many beginners out there. We'll discuss essential C# concepts such as output and variables. Let's get started. We'll begin by creating a new project and using the Windows Forms application template. Go ahead and name it whatever you want. I'll go with Tutorial 1. Now keep in mind this will be the starting point for most of my tutorials to come, so just know that. Alright, so we're given a blank form and a bunch of graphic elements in our toolbox over here. If your toolbox is not showing, you can go to View, Other Windows, and then Toolbox. Now, all of these graphic elements are generated by the IDE to save us a lot of programming time. And we're going to go ahead and throw a couple of buttons in here. And resize them how you want them. It really doesn't matter to me. It's your program, so do what you want. Just going to make it look a little more nice. You can change the text property of this form window to, for instance, my program. You can also change the text properties on these buttons. For instance, I'll name this one output, and I'll name this one variable output, because that's what we will be doing with them. Right. So go ahead and double click on the output button in order to take us into the Form 1 code sheet. And basically what it has done is generated a new line of code that basically says whenever button 1 is clicked, and button 1, by the way, is the name identifier for the output button, whenever it is clicked, everything within these brackets will be executed. All of the code within these brackets will be executed. So we're going to go ahead and put in some basic code. First of all, a lot of programmers like to know how to comment in the programming language they're learning. So right off the bat, I'm going to let you know that commenting in C# is done through 2 forward slashes like this. Oh, whoops. For those of you who do not know what a comment is, it is essentially a note to the programmer letting them know essential things about their program. Basically, they'll leave these little, I guess you could call them sticky notes or post-it notes, just above code that they are typing, and it's like a reference basically telling you what something does, or some notes about how you did something, or something you should come back to later. Just a note to the future programmer who's working on a program. So right below this comment, I'm going to do some output. So the main way we're going to do output in the tutorials I make is through message boxes. There's obviously several other ways to do output, labels, really anything, but message box is essentially what we'll be doing in the beginning. So the way you do a message box is pretty straightforward, just message box, and this invokes the message box class, and then we'll be using the show method within the message box class, which is .show. And then, of course, we're going to end every programming line with a semicolon, which is not new to programmers by any means. And obviously, we have an error here because I'm not passing any parameter through to the show method. Now, for this particular method, we will need a string. And this string will basically be the string that is outputted through this message box. This message box will appear in a pop-up box format, and it will output a string that we give it. So for this string, we'll just do something. We'll stick with something pretty simple. We'll do my name is Chris. And keep in mind that if you were to not do a string, for instance a 9 or some other number, you will get an error. So we'll keep it at my name's Chris. So, to test out a program, we'll just hit the Start Debugging button and test out how it's working. When we click Output, we do get a pop-up box saying, my name is Chris. So it is working properly. Just to show you another way you can type message box, but simpler, you may have noticed when you start typing in C#, it starts suggesting things to you in this autofill feature. If we type in MB, MB, it'll notice we're trying to make a message box. and we can do tab, and it will fill it out for us. Message box dot show test, and we can replace test with whatever we want, obviously. So that is basic output. Let's move on to making some variables and outputting those as well. So let's go into the Form 1 design area, and let's double click on variable output to go ahead and create another line of code in our Form 1 CS file. And basically, once again, this one is an on-click event, and we'll just fill it up with some more code to execute once this second button is clicked on. Right, so let's create some variables. There are multiple types of variables that can be used in C#, a very large amount. And there's several different types of decimals, for instance, doubles, floats. They all have differences, very minor differences, mostly dealing with size, the size of the decimal. And then we've got our integers, which is a whole number, and our strings and our characters, which are dealing with alphanumeric. Right, so for our first variable, let's go ahead and create a string. As noted before, strings are encapsulated in quotations. Whenever you create a variable, you need to give it a type, give it a name, and then a value. A value is optional. It will assign a default value if you do not give it a value, but we're going to, in this case, give it a value. First of all, let's give it a name. For instance, this one, we'll just say it's called name, and we'll give it a value of Chris, like in our first example. As you may notice, the name is underlined in green. That basically means that you have not used the variable yet. This is a warning. Green underlines means warning, red is error. So when it's green, you can choose to ignore it, but it is usually a good coding practice to at least take a look at your warnings and see if you can minimize them, because they do show that you will have problems down along the line. Red is fatal. Red means your program cannot be executed. So then, let's create an integer. And we'll set it to age, and we'll give it a value of 20. Right, so as you can see, numbers do not need to be encapsulated in quotations, single or double. And we can also create a decimal, or in this case we'll use double. Double is the more common form of decimal. There are differences between declaring decimal, double, or float. Mainly the difference lies with size, as in how many spaces can we have, how many decimal places can we have. You can find a detailed explanation online based on what double can be and what decimal can be and what floats can be. There's like specific numbers they can go out to. Right, so we'll make double set to pi and give it pi's value, or in this case math.pi we can use, because I do want to show you some math stuff that you can do with C#. Right, so math is basically a system class, and pi is actually a method within that class. So pi is obviously set in this case to the value of pi. The value of pi, in case those of you who have not taken a rudimentary geometry course, pi is 3.1415, and then there's several numbers after that. If you want, you can try and memorize as far as you can. It goes pretty much infinitely. We can also do rudimentary math in C#. For instance, we'll give it an integer value, and we'll say rand, and we'll take, for instance, age, and we'll multiply it by 3. So basically that'll be 60, because age is set to 20, so 3 times 20 is 60. We can even do parentheses. If you've taken algebra, you'll know the order of operations. And we can multiply, or actually in this case we'll divide by 2. And we can even parenthesize that, and it just goes on and on and on. You can use any basic math, plus, minus, anything really. And then we could even take all of that and multiply it by pi, which we're not going to do in this example. So, how do we print this out if we can't use numbers? Well, we'll turn the numbers into a string. Let's make a message box, and we'll just say my name is Chris. And as I told you before, we'll do the next line, and we'll say I am. Oh, for Chris, by the way, what we're going to do is we're going to make that a variable. And we'll take name and put that in there. The way you put in variables, like you've just seen me do, is with addition symbols. You can just exit out of the string by closing it with a quotation, and then just put in an addition symbol, and then name, another addition symbol, and then more text. Or you could just leave the text off. That's perfectly fine too. So now what we're going to do is put in an age. For instance, we'll do age years old. And let's go to the next line, and lastly we'll just say random number is, and then we'll add in that random number we created called rand. If we wanted to, we could also add in pi. In fact, let's do that. Let's just put in another n and say pi is pi. Now you could also just do math.pi if you wanted to. You don't have to create a variable for it. That's perfectly logical. You can include this into your expression. Because as long as these quotations have been added onto these variables are no longer considered integers, and they can be used as a parameter for this messagebox.show. By the way, I'm using a lot of programming terms that some of you out there might not know yet. Parameter is basically your variable that you're passing through a function, in this case the show function, or method in this case. And a variable is anything containing data that you have set within the program. For instance, these are all variables. This is a class. We'll get to classes in a later lesson, a very later lesson. And that's pretty much it right now. This is the most basic you need to know. Variables output, and it all works flawlessly. Let's go ahead and debug it, and I'll show you how button 2 reacts. Once we click button 2, my name is Chris. We expected that to happen. I am 20 years old, because our age variable was set to 20. Random number is 35, and that is of course due to the fact that we are taking 20, multiplying that by 3, making 60, dividing by 2, making 30, and then adding 5 on to make 35. Pi is, and we get nothing. Now you may be wondering why that is. That's because I left it off. I took it out on accident. Right, I meant to put the pi variable back in there, so let's debug it again. And there you go, 3.14159265358979. That's as far as it'll go. It does not continue showing you the rest of the numbers for pi, because if it did, it would literally take forever. Right. So, that is variables and output and roughly anything else that we wanted to cover in this lesson. Be sure to continue on.